We're going to go to Ruth. Ruth chapter 4. This is Judges part 2. We're coming to the end of it, this story of Ruth. And I want you to think about actually what I was saying to the children about stories. Because how do you learn? You learn by stories, don't we? You know, it's if someone just did a doctrinal point after doctrinal point after doctrinal point, you wouldn't really get it. I was at a farmers' conference. It was a men's conference. It used to be a farmers' conference. Most of the guys were farmers last weekend. It was lovely to be able to tune in and hear Cornelius here as well and hear your singing, which was lovely last week. But at this conference, you've got 200 mostly farmers sitting in front of you, and you are talking, but it's very, very interesting. As soon as you mention farming, their ears pricked up, because it's something they knew something about, and you tell stories, and people connect with stories. Well, we learn through stories. There's kind of the big story, and we sort of remember those stories. But we need to get the truth that comes out of them. They're not just a story. If you remember an illustration, but you don't remember what it's illustrating, it's not a very good illustration, or you've not been listening very well. And in the same way, with stories, there's always a background, there's always a truth, there's always a philosophy. And that is true of Ruth. Now, Ruth is basically over here. You get the story, and then you work your way through, and you understand in the context of the whole Bible what's the truth it's conveying. When we look at Colossians, we're going to start with the truth, and then we'll work our way back to all the stories. So what I hope to do at Alive at 5 this evening is Colossians is about philosophy, and we're going to look at what philosophy is and the philosophies that we have in our culture. And for those of you who say, well, I'm not really into philosophy, yes, you are, because every single person has a philosophy. So philosophy just simply means philo is love, so phileo, friendship, and then Sophia means wisdom. We have a Sophia in our presence who's very wise. And philo means love of wisdom, philosophy. And we all need to have wisdom. Now, I think that what we're looking at is God's big story here. But also in this, we often tend to look and say, where do I fit in this story? So to give you the example of the First and Second World War, you look at the roll of honor that's along this. There may even be some people here who can say, that was my granddad. We fit in the story of the First and Second World Wars because we are a nation that was shaped by those wars. But it may be that when you go to an Anzac parade, and for me, it's one of the great things about Australian life that these are so respected and honored. You go to an Anzac parade, and there's the general story, but then when a name is read out, you're saying, well, that was my granddad. Or you may be conscious of maybe your father fighting in Vietnam or something and suffering from PTSD. And then it becomes much more personal. Now, there are many great stories in the world. Annabelle and I went to see one yesterday, the Odyssey. Sometimes, I think 2 weeks ago, I mentioned a sporting score, and one of you was upset because you'd saved it on video and you didn't want to know the result, so apologies for that. And sometimes there is a spoiler alert that occurs, but if you don't know what the story of the Odyssey is, then you're an uncultured peasant. It doesn't matter anyway. So I'm not really spoiling. It's like the Titanic, a ship sinks, okay? And that's not really spoiling the film, if you know that. And it's the same with the Odyssey. It's just, you may think you don't even know it, but there are so many things. Where does the word mentor come from? It comes from the Odyssey. Or the sirens, or Cyclops, the one-eyed monster. The Odyssey is just one of the greatest stories ever told, and it has survived for more than 2,500 years. So I went to see the film, and I always go like this. The film is always going to be worse than the book. And I was told the film was very woke, and it is a bit woke, but not massively. And remember, it's a fable, so don't expect historical accuracy. Actually, I have to say this. It was brilliant. For a 3-hour film, it was absolutely brilliant. And the way the story works is very similar to the Bible at one level, because it keeps interspersing. It doesn't start here and then go to there. So you look at it, there are morals that you can take from it. The film version, by the way, is much more Hollywood in that it's much more simplistic. In the poem, in the Greek original poem, the character of Odysseus is much more complex. He does good and bad things. But Hollywood always has to have a hero, and a bad guy. But the point of that is the Odyssey as a story has survived because it's just such a great story. Now, when we come to Ruth, it's a great story. You can read it if you want, and lots of people will do this, as a love story from an ancient culture about how a poor foreign immigrant ends up marrying a rich farmer who provides him and her with a family who look after them into their old age. And we can look at it, and we can do with what you would do with something like Little House on the Prairie. You just turn it into something idyllic and wonderful. By the way, we've been watching that on Netflix as well, and that's brilliant too. So I'm in a good mood with the stuff I can see just now. Instead of standing up and saying, that was rubbish or woke nonsense, Little House on the Prairie is my sweet spot, honestly. So I'm sorry about that. Somebody said, it's Hallmark, and I go, I don't care. It's just lovely, and it is lovely, and this story is lovely, but it's much, 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 much more than that. This is not a manual on courting. I've heard it preached like that. It really isn't. Ladies, don't go and lay down at the feet of some random guy. It's not a manual on courting. It's not a manual on family life. It's not a manual about sexual relations. It's part of the unfolding story of the Bible. And if you remember in context, it's in the context of Judges, which tells us there was chaos in the land where everyone did as they saw fit. And yet out of that, God was weaving his long-term plan so that from this, hundreds of years later, would come a man who would be the Savior of the world, who they looked forward to and who we look back at. So as we go through this, I'm going to apply it to you, apply it in that context, and say that this is the way you read the Bible. You read the Bible through the lens of Christ. As Jesus told the two on the road to Emmaus, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained from the scriptures everything that was said about him. So let's go verses 1 to 6. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer. For those, by the way, who are new, who don't know the story, this is the story of a woman, Naomi, who got married to a Moabite and had 2 daughters. One of those daughters, Ruth, came back with her after her husband died, and both husbands died. And the story reaches the point where Ruth has basically courted Boaz, an older man, a farmer, and we come in at this point. By the way, I should say, the film, what's that film? 4 Weddings, isn't it? 4 Weddings and a Funeral. Well, this book is 3 funerals and a wedding. I guess it wouldn't make such a great film title. You wouldn't go and see it. 4 Weddings and a Funeral sounds a better proportion. But this is 3 funerals. And now we come on to the wedding. So meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate, sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling that piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Okay, now, we need to understand this and the context of it just to realize what's happening. In this chapter, God is, if you like, rewriting it. The story starts off incredibly sad. As I said, the 3 funerals. The Naomi's husband and her 2 sons-in-law die. Psalm 30 verse 5 says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And this is where the joy comes. Now, the kinsman redeemer law. What is this? What are we talking about with this? We go back to Leviticus chapter 25, if you have a Bible, and let me just read part of it. It's really key to understanding what is going on here. So Leviticus 25 and verse 23. The land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. So nobody could own land permanently. I just saw that somebody has taken a 999-year lease in the City of London, some big bank. Everything in Israel, nobody actually owned the land. You in effect leased it because it was from God. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. If one of your fellow Israelites become poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one to whom they have sold it. They can then go back to their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee, and they can then go back to their property. Anyone who sells a house in a walled city retains the right of redemption a full year after its sale. During that time, the seller may redeem it. If it is not redeemed before a full year has passed, the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to the buyer and the buyer's descendants. It is not to be returned in the Jubilee. But houses in villages without walls around them are to be considered as belonging to the open country. They can be redeemed, and they are to be returned in the Jubilee. Now, it goes on with lots of instructions about how you do that. But the point was this: to own your own land, to have your own house. Let's call it the Australian dream. That was inherent in Israelite culture, and you passed it on to your children. Now, let's say you became poor, you couldn't afford to live there, you wanted to sell the house. There was a right for you or your family to buy it back later. Now, there's so much in that, and I actually think, although this is not a book about, how we deal with property, I think there are things to learn about it. That the purpose of the Israelite thing is to preserve the name and protect the property of families in Israel. God owned the land. He didn't want it exploited by rich people who would take advantage of poor people and widows. And I think there's a basic principle in there, that it is wrong that Australia would be owned by massive corporations who, let's say on the farming side, buy up the small farms so the small farmers can't pass it on. I saw that, I've seen it in my own country, in Scotland, and I think it was wonderful that in the Highlands and Islands, particularly in the western side of it, that people were allowed to have crofts, which really were not massive. They were 15 acres, but you had enormous difficulty in selling them. They were to be used as crofts. They could not be bought up into bigger units. Now, this is very important. If you're reading the Bible, if you don't understand this, you really won't get a lot of what the Bible says. Why? Because God judged the Israelites for being greedy. So, for example, and there's loads of examples. Isaiah 5:8. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field, till no space is left, and you live alone in the land. The Lord Almighty has declared in my hearing, surely the great houses will become desolate, the fine mansions left without occupants. A 10-acre vineyard will produce only a bath of wine, a homer of seed will yield only an ephah of grain. So God was warning about greed. Sometimes, you look in our culture and you think, why does a couple need a house that's got 15 bedrooms and 4 garages and 12 bathrooms? Why? Why would you need that? And why would you boast about it? And what really has been said in Israel is, whose land have you bought up to enable to make this happen? So the nation's abuse of the land was one cause of their captivity. And the point about this in the context of this story is redemption. So here, the land of Elimelech had been sold, but there was a right to buy it back, to redeem it. Now Ruth was too poor to redeem the land, so was Naomi. When Elimelech had died, the land had passed to Ruth's husband Mahlon. But the kinsman redeemer had to be a near kinsman, the nearest. So let's say my brother owned a house and he died. I, as the nearest relative, would have the right to buy it up on behalf of the family. So Boaz is really clever here. Look what he does. This is genius negotiating. He says there was a kinsman redeemer who was closer than Boaz. So he says to this relative, come and have a seat. Come and sit beside me. And then he says, let's get 10 elders. Now, this is not elders in the Presbyterian sense. He's not calling a Kirk session. What he's doing is he's saying, 10 of the elders of the land, they are witnesses. You needed, because you didn't write things down so much, you needed witnesses who could testify. So let's get 10 elders. And he gets them there, and he has a conversation with him. And he says, hey, Naomi's back. She's selling the land. Do you want to buy it? You're entitled to buy it. Oh, yeah, he says, I'll buy it. And then Boaz does his killer blow. He says this, on the day you buy it, you also get Ruth the Moabite. Now, and we don't like the idea of purchasing people, but you had a responsibility to look after the widow. The way you looked after the widow was by marrying them. And that puts him off. Now, why? Why does it put him off? It could be because he didn't want to marry a Moabite woman. But in reality, I think it was just good old-fashioned, perhaps greed. Because here's the thing. If he got married to Ruth, and he had a son by Ruth, and that son was his only surviving heir, then his property and estate would also go to Ruth's family. And so he would lose it. So he's thinking, I can't marry this woman in case I lose my inheritance. Now, again, let me just make a simple observation in terms of principle. He's refusing to redeem because it's going to cost a lot. Let me say this. We often want what God will give. We want communion. We want fellowship. We want peace. But we're not prepared to pay any price for it. And that's where he was at. All right, let's go on to verses 7 to 12. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have brought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not be disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing Epaphra and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now, just very simply to say about this, what's this thing with a shoe? Why take off your sandal? There are various theories about this, but one was there was a divine commandment to walk on the land and to take possession. And it was a symbol. This belongs. So the 10 witnesses were able to see the kinsman hand his shoe to Boaz. And what the kinsman is doing is saying, it's all yours. Everything. And Boaz is like, he's not interested in the land. He's got plenty of land. That's not his motive. His motive is he wants Ruth. He's fallen in love with Ruth. He wants Ruth. And so whereas, and he doesn't care if a child born to him inherits all his land. That's not, he wants Ruth. So in the first part, you've got somebody saying, I can't redeem it. And in the second part, you've got this man saying, I can. And then verses 13 to 17. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. It's an interesting prayer, isn't it? That the people pray. Just read that, a bit earlier, where it said, through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. And they use a phrase, epaphrata, place, which means fruitful. Now it's interesting, attitudes in society towards children. Our culture has absolutely gone a massive sea change in attitudes towards children. I mean, in theory, we all love children, right? Who doesn't love seeing the children down at the front? But I'm talking about a cultural thing within society. So I remember this really coming home to me when a woman who had already had, I think, 3 children, she was pregnant. She's a young woman, and she was pregnant with twins. And she's a doctor. And when I went up to her and said, I'm so happy for you, she burst into tears and gave me a big hug. And I said, okay, what did you do that for? She said, because I think everyone thinks I'm a freak. I actually like children, and I'm very, very happy that I'm going to have 2 more. And she said, but my colleagues and others think, what are you doing? You know, you're polluting the planet. You're going to cost the state a fortune and everything. And I just thought, how sad that we've come to that. And the consequences of this are now being felt in our generation and the next generation, where in virtually every Western country, but also in particularly South Korea and Japan, they are not having enough children to sustain their society, so they have to bring in lots of people to do the work that the people are not there to do. And it's not only not having enough children, it's obviously people who don't want children and everything else that goes along with that. And, you know, I think that this is just hugely significant and hugely important, our attitude to children. We read in Isaiah, I formed you in the womb. You know, there's a child up there, you can see. I got my daughter's permission to put her up. I said, can I show this girl, Flora? And she said, Dad, you can show wherever you want, as long as you don't show photos of me in my hospital bed. You know, so that was fine. So last week was a big week for lots of things, but Flora was born. And she was born, the nurses just apparently were astounded at the amount of ginger hair she came with. She is definitely a ginger. And, that precious wee child. But that precious wee child didn't come into existence last week. That precious wee child existed 2 weeks ago, and 2 months ago, and 9 months ago. You know? And there is an attitude towards children and babies that a lot of people think, well, they're a nuisance, they're an economic inconvenience or whatever. And we are going to reap the fruit of that, and we will reap the fruit of that in our culture and our society. Because here, they rejoiced that she was fruitful. Now, I realize, and I want to be cautious here, I realize that there are people who are unable to have children or who don't want children. And that's okay. That's not what I'm talking about. And for some people, that's a cause of deep distress. But if in society as a whole you regard women who have children as being somehow freakish, if they have more than one or two, there's something wrong with the society. And you see that here. So the family of Perez had settled in Bethlehem, and Boaz was a descendant of Perez. And if you go back into Genesis 38, you see how all this came about. Tamar, the mother of Perez, by the way, was not a godly woman. She was a very corrupt woman. And yet she's named in the genealogy of Jesus, which I just think is incredible. They had a son then, and this son is called Obed. And none of you will call your son Obed, and I'll tell you why. Or at least you wouldn't do it in English, because Obed just means servant. So imagine if you called your son servant. Hey, servant, come here. And that poor child is going to get teased mercilessly at school. Hey, servant. But that's what they called him. They called him servant. And that baby was a special blessing to Boaz and Ruth. I would argue every baby is a special gift from God. And you see that. I mean, the wee one up on the screen there, I don't care. Last night, I'll confess I was asleep. I don't know, 8:45, and the phone rings, and Annabelle comes up, and there's the wee one. You can wake me at 3 a.m. just to see the wee one. I don't care. You're just glad to see them, because every child is a gift from God. And when the children get older and you're struggling a bit with them, just remember that. They're still a gift from God. And that's the attitude to have. And to Naomi, here's the grandmother coming in, because Naomi formally adopted him as her own son and became, in effect, his foster mother. Naomi, at the beginning of this story, is broken and beaten and discouraged and depressed. What's the point of living? And by the end of the story, she's looking after her grandchild, and actually her grandchild grows up to look after her. And always remember that, please, when you're holding a baby, and I always think of this, you're holding the future in your hands. Some of us are at an age when we think, well, most of our years have gone, they're gone. No matter how long the Lord gives to us, we're not going to live double the time we've got now. But that's why grandchildren become so precious. And then this, and for some, this seems like a really dull ending of a book. Right? Who's going to end a book like this? And for me, it is the absolute, I just love this. The genealogy of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Remember from Genesis 38. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. Now, why is that so great? Oh, so many ways. Number one, God had said that the Moabites would be excluded to 10 generations. And if you married a Moabite, you're excluded from Israel for 10 generations. This is 10 generations. A Moabite and a Moabite's son is welcome in. I think also the blessing that's seen here to Bethlehem, born in Bethlehem, Obed born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem and then Jerusalem would become the capital through the life and ministry of King David, the great-grandson. He would bring blessing to Israel and to the whole world through Jesus Christ. I think every time you hold a child in your arms, remember that God could have planned a great future for that. I think this whole story is a story of the power and grace of God. Now, I want to apply it in this way. The new heaven and the new earth. You'll see the story of the Bible begins in a garden, ends in a city, and this new heaven and the new earth, and the story of the bride. In the beginning of the Bible, you have a broken covenant. In the end of the Bible, you have a renewed covenant. Now, speaking of stories, I wonder if I said to you the line, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive," who would you say that was from? Shakespeare. Of course you would. So would I. I've said it's from Shakespeare. It's not. It's not from Shakespeare. Shakespeare wasn't good enough to write that. It was a Scot that wrote that. And his name was Sir Walter Scott. And it's a great poem. The poem is called Marion. And it was written in 1808. I could have sworn that was from Shakespeare. Seriously, I was. And I thought, actually, maybe I should check this if it's from Shakespeare. And so I went and looked, and I thought, oh no, AI's got this wrong. And then I checked again, and I looked at the poem. It's not Shakespeare. It's from Sir Walter Scott. And what I love about that is, in it, Scott in the poem is showing how all the characters deceive and how they're really complex. Very much fits with the original Odyssey. I think what happens in the Bible is this. The world is confused. Stories tell us of great confusion. But what the Bible does, it brings light and it unravels the great mysteries so that we understand. So, if you go back to verses 14 and 15, praise be to the Lord who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. The reference there is not to Boaz. It's also towards the child. And the idea there is this child will look after you and will take care of you as well. Now, again, that's important. You know, in our society, we've so cut back on the importance of family that we think it's the responsibility of the state. But no, it's not. It's the responsibility of children. And some of you will know this, that there has been a burden in looking after elderly parents. And parents will say, well, I don't want to be a burden. And that's how euthanasia and everything comes in as well. I don't want to be a burden. You don't want to be a burden. A burden. They gave you birth. They cared for you, looked after you. They brought you into this world. The very least we can do is do what we can to care for our parents. Now, we can't do absolutely everything, but we can. And it's lovely to see how very often I have the privilege of witnessing, and because I'm involved in funerals and everything, how children have cared for and looked after their parents in their latter years. But this is something even more, a redeemer. In Matthew chapter 1, let me just read it, because I think, for me, this is the point of why Matthew begins in this way. Because Matthew, again, telling a story, it's a list of names. But look at what it says. Verse 4, Ram was the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahah, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. In other words, the story of the gospel begins with the descendants, and it includes Ruth and all of this. That's the beauty of Ruth. If you don't get that, you don't understand the point of the story and why it's in the Bible. Now let me apply this again, and I'm not being fanciful here. The Bible itself does this. Let me apply this in this way. When it comes to redemption, most of us, I think most people would say, I don't need to be redeemed. I'm not a slave. You know, you understand the principle of redemption, that you can buy back a house. But why would I need to be bought back? Because all of us are in bondage to sin and Satan. And Christ comes and gives his life as a ransom for sinners. So Revelation 5, you are worthy to open its seals. With your blood you purchase for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nations. You are worthy to take the scroll. Now, when it uses the word purchased, it means you redeemed, you bought us back. And there are so many similarities here with Boaz. Jesus had to become related to us before he could redeem us. The Redeemer has to be a kinsman redeemer. And Jesus became flesh and blood so that he could die for us on the cross. I mean, why didn't Jesus just die in outer space? Why did he even become human? Because it was necessary that the one who died for humans should be a human. Hebrews 2:14, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. As I say, I have to go to a lot of funeral parlors. Not as many as Annabelle in her work, but you go to a lot of funeral services. And I wish undertakers would get this. There's a coffin at the front of the church here. There'll be a coffin here. And people think, well, I'm not sure what people think. I think it's a deeply confusing time. It's a deeply painful time. It's a deeply hurtful time. But there is a power of death, and you feel that power. When you are in that situation, there's nothing you can do. You can have all the superstitions you want. You can touch the coffin. You can bow. You can go through all the rituals. But it doesn't matter. The reason that you are there mourning is because there is a power that has come in and taken the life of the person you loved. There is a power. And who is going to break that power? Not the church, not the minister, not the undertaker. Nobody is going to break that power except this. The one who died and freed all those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. We were watching, it seems like we were doing a lot of watching, but we have been doing a lot of watching. There's a YouTube thing, look it up, History of the Puritans. Brilliant, 2-hour thing on the Puritans, absolutely brilliant. And at the end, I think it's John Piper who quotes the Puritan who said that for the Puritan, the day of their death was better than the day of their birth. So I go back to the picture of my wee grandchild. What a day of rejoicing. Can you really grasp what a day of rejoicing it will be when she dies as a believer and goes to be with the Lord? That's better than the day of her birth. Because death has been defeated. Now, it doesn't mean we don't sorrow. It doesn't mean that there isn't pain. But it does mean that there is a deeper joy. The kinsman redeemer also had to pay the redemption price. Ruth and Naomi were too poor to redeem themselves. Boaz had all the resources necessary. Again, this is so emphasized in the New Testament. 1 Peter 1:18. For you know it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors. I'll finish the sentence in a minute, but just think about it this way. How much is your life worth? Could you go to God and the devil or whoever and say, here's $1 million, save their life, we'll redeem their life? Could you sacrifice your family? We'll save their life. Could you do 1,000,001 good deeds? We'll save their life. No, none of that. None of that can do that. There's only one thing that can redeem us. And Peter says this, you were redeemed with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. That's how valuable you are. A price was paid that nobody could pay. That you could have 1,000,000 worlds and sell everything in those worlds and it would not count. But the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. And also, Christ had to be willing to redeem. I will stop because I know we could go on like this forever, but it's just wonderful. He had to be willing to redeem. Jesus says, when he's in agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. He took the cup and he drank it. And in the words of Rabbi Duncan, it was filled with damnation and he drank it gladly. He drank it willingly. It was our sin that he died for. He drank it. He took it. And he made us a part of his inheritance, just as Boaz made Ruth and her child part of his inheritance. Just a couple other things I noticed. 5 times in Ruth chapter 4, you find people sitting down. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but what did Jesus do when he finished, when he ascended into heaven? He sat down at the right hand of the Father and said, it's done, it's finished, the work is complete. I love the fact that God's redemption, Christ's redemption, is paid for. I keep hearing people say this, and I hear Christians say this, and I feel, oh, you're missing out on so much saying this. They say, well, God did his bit, now we have to do ours. No. He did it. He did it. He completed it. He fixed it. Yes, of course we believe and we follow, but we don't say, okay, you fulfilled your part of the contract, now we're going to do our bit, and then the two things come together, and that's what makes it complete. No, it was complete before. And then, this is really the final thing I'll say. This is how God works in chaos. Chaos is not all-powerful. Oops. Beg your pardon. That's Tim Keller talking about ransom on my phone. I was listening to it on the way in. This is how God works in chaos. Chaos is not all-powerful. We might think it is. Chaos is not all-powerful. Oh, the world's doomed. Oh, we're, climate change and chaos and fires and drought and political chaos and chaos in my family and chaos everywhere. It's just everything is chaos. In Genesis 1:2, there was chaos, and the Spirit of God hovered over and brought order out of that chaos. And this is the story of the Bible. Light has come into the world. And in John 1:5, and the darkness never has and never will be able to put it out. Light has come into the world. At the time of the Judges, we've gone through the whole book of Judges, and we've seen the chaos and the mess, and yet we've also seen how God worked in that. And that's why Ruth is so important, because from that one situation of a Jewish woman who married a Moabitess who came back, has come Christ. And from Christ comes the new heavens and the new earth. And from Christ comes freedom from death. From Christ comes freedom from the devil. From Christ comes peace and joy and love and all the gifts of the Holy Spirit. God is not overcome by chaos. Hades, hell, death, the devil do not win. Christ wins. But you have to decide if you believe this. You have to decide if you will follow this. I weep for you if you don't. I really do. Because I'm telling you this, when things are really, really tough, and you're able to get up and say, yes, but though he slay me, yet I will trust him, because he is the one. Look what he's done, and look what he will continue to do. Amen. Lord, we ask your blessing on your word. Apply it to each one of us. May we live it. May we rejoice in it. May we follow you. In your name we ask it. Amen.